So Michael Togas is a New York Times best-selling author of 30 books for adults and for young adults. The Finest Hours, a true story of the Coast Guard's greatest rescue, was made into a Disney movie, and we are so lucky to have you here. Thank you, Michael, for being here.
Thank you, Barbara. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming out. What a great turnout. I actually did two books on the Connecticut River. River Days is about a kayak and canoe trip I took from the start to the sea, and with the slides, I'll take you on the journey with me. And then I did a book about growing up on the Connecticut River. I grew up in Long Meadow, Massachusetts, and this is a kind of a different book. There's some parts that are laugh out loud funny, because I was a kid always in trouble. But then other parts are about the relationship between my dad and I, how different we were, but then how a family tragedy brought us together. So you're laughing in some sections, crying in others, so it's a different book. And then got very lucky. The Finest Hours got made into a movie, and that led me to an editor that said, let's turn your true adult survival books into books for middle readers. So this would be age 8 to 14. So this is the young adult edition of the Finest Hours. So on the table there's a series of 8 of these true survival and rescue books if you have a grandchild or a child in mind. Because they're reading too much about vampires and superheroes. I want to show them real heroes that have flaws like the rest of us. And then during the lockdown, during the COVID, I wrote Extreme Survival, Lessons from Those Who Have Triumphed Against All Odds. Because over the past 30 years, I've interviewed about 100 survivors who shouldn't be on the planet. And I begin to see patterns in how they got through the ordeal without giving up. So I said, I'm going to tell their stories, but group their stories by the technique, the mental technique that got them through when I would have probably cracked. And then last but not least, a book about Vermont called There's a Porcupine in My Outhouse, The Vermont Misadventures of a Mountain Man Wannabe. So it's a little bit like Bill Bryson's A Walk in the Woods. When I was 22, I had always been coming to Vermont, vacationing from Massachusetts, and fell in love with the state. So when I was 22, I bought a cabin in northern Vermont and thought I'd make my living as a wildlife photographer and living off the land, and everything went wrong. You name it, it happened, including the porcupine that lived in the outhouse, and he lived underneath where you sit in the outhouse. That's never good. So that's what this book is, covers age 22 to 24 when I'm doing this experiment. And before I get started, I do a newsletter every October. So if you're interested, you can print your email. Here's for the first couple of rows, and here's for the back rows. In the newsletter, I just talk about, what it is I'm working on. So I'm going to get us started. So I did this trip down the Connecticut River over a series of weekends because I was working at the time at a day job, and so it spanned, a year's period. But there's a gentleman here who did it in 2 weeks from start to finish, because I always wanted to know how long would it take you if you stayed at it. So has anybody been to the source? A couple people, way up Pittsburgh, New Hampshire, right on the Canadian border. It's on the U.S. side of the border and begins to do its flow. And that stretch from Canada to Lancaster is really beautiful. It's breathtaking because you have rapids and these sweeping bends in the river. So every year I always go back to that stretch and pick a new area to fish. So this is the source. Fourth Connecticut Lake is what it's called. Tiny little, basically a beaver pond. And the river flows out of there. but way too shallow to canoe or kayak. So I didn't technically start at the source, but at the to see the source, you park at the customs station there. And I asked the woman, "Have you ever seen anybody try to kayak the whole thing?" She said, "Oh yeah, two guys carried a canoe all the way to the source and then dragged it down the river. They did it," she said. That's God's country up there, just beautiful, great trout fishing. Most of the land is owned by paper companies. And you have in the fall, you've got the brown trout, they spawn and they take on some orange dots like the leaves. And the moose are there. People go, "How did you get that slide?" I say, "Through the car window." The one place to see moose, although the population has been going down because of winter ticks killing them, the most moose I've ever seen is Route 3 through Pittsburgh, New Hampshire. And I was talking to a person who in town, and they said, "Oh, well, you know, that attracts tourists, so we lay down extra salt in the winter, and it goes into those little swales next to the road, and the moose are attracted to the salt." But I see less and less moose here in Vermont because of this problem. Maybe the population probably peaked 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago. I call this the unicorn moose. Not all pictures come out as planned. And this was long before digital cameras, so remember, you send away the film and you had to wait a week to see what you got. And I got a unicorn. So as the river makes its way south, it goes through a series of lakes, and the biggest one is First Connecticut Lake. These are some cabins you can rent there at the Glen. And then opposite this lake is Back Lake, and that's a real beauty too, because you're looking west here. I have a friend who bought a cabin on this lake, and it's just a gorgeous spot. And you see the loons up there, and if you look carefully, there's a chick riding on the back of the mother, and so if the mother dives down for a minnow, the baby just bobs on the surface. When the mother comes back up, the baby crawls right up the back.
This is all New Hampshire?
Yeah, we're all up in that Pittsburgh region. So if you ever go up to the source, bring your passport so you can go into Canada, and you drive 1 mile into Canada, you'll see this white house, and there's a sign there, and the sign says Magnetic Hill. And you put your car in neutral, and then slowly your car goes backwards up the hill. It's the strangest feeling. So 1 mile, but remember, you have to have a passport now. And it shows you I'm doing too much writing and not keeping up with my housework. This is in Pittsburgh, New Hampshire. And by the way, most of these slides are taken during the summer, so you're going to get pumped for the nice weather coming up.
That house is still there.
Yeah, I was up there this year. I couldn't believe it. It's still. Where's your camp?
It's actually in Jefferson.
Mm-hmm.
We go riding up on a lot of travel trips, so I go up there purposely.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, that house. And it's a beautiful spot, too. He's on a hill, so I don't know why they don't try to rebuild. And so you have the mountain ranges separating the Connecticut River from the Androscoggin River. And so this is at Dixville Notch, and that's called Table Rock, the tallest one. You can either do a difficult climb up the steep part there, or a little easier climb up the side. And you get a beautiful view when you're at the top. So plan on like a couple hours to get to the summit. And then across this little Lake Gloria is the balsams now. I understand they're trying to convert these into condominiums now, and I haven't heard how this experiment is going. But it used to be quite a place because they have a little ski slope nearby. Yes? I'll try a little bit louder. Yeah, and they have a golf course there, so I'm not sure where, where this experiment of switching it to condominiums is going. So that the good canoeing and kayaking begins down around Stewartston, Beecher Falls, Vermont. There the water's deep enough with a nice current to take you down river. And you can see how beautiful it is. And you've got mostly, class 1 or class 2 rapids in places, a couple spots, borderline class 3. My friend said, your canoe is so small, it looks like you're in a bathtub. But the key is you want something light, if you're going alone, lightweight enough that you can put it up on top of your car. And the first time I did it, he dropped me off, and then I went down, say 8 miles. I'm like, how am I going to get back to the car? So I quickly came up with this idea of guess where you're going to take out and chain a bicycle to a tree down there, then drive up north, and then put in and paddle down, pull out by your bike, get in the bike to bike back to your car, get your car, go get your canoe. And then I saw somebody a little smarter than me. He's coming down in a canoe, and his bike was in the front of the canoe. So he a little smarter, saved himself that back and forth.
It's called a wee lassie. It only weighs about 20 pounds.
The lightweight is crucial. I'm looking into paddle boards that is any lightweight enough. Because I love to, now I do a lot of kayaking on the ocean going after striped bass. And again, can you handle it yourself to get it up on the car? And I saw these 3 women zip by me in kayaks, and that's when, this is years ago, I got the idea of maybe I need to buy a kayak. You go a lot faster, you have the backrest, you're lower to the water, so the double-bladed paddle, more efficient. And this was the first real hazard, but I've heard, this is called the Lyman Dam that's been breached, but I've heard they've taken out these big chunks of concrete that used to send your canoe toppling over. I forgot to walk in there when I was up there this summer, so I don't know if it still looks like this, but it was tricky because that's a good 2-foot drop, and when you're coming down the river, you can't really see it. You just see, this is the view you get of it. You go, oh, a little white water, a couple rocks, and then it's too late. You drop down that 2 foot. And so I always would portage around it. One time I was with a couple friends, and I told them, let's not go over that. Let's pull our canoes around. And then some guy came down in a canoe, and he was going to go over, and he did it perfectly. He found the right seam in between those pieces of concrete, and he raised his paddle in victory and promptly capsized. And I helped him get his fishing pole off the bottom of that pool, and there were a couple others, so other people had made the same mistake. So anyways, this may be improved where you can now safely go over it. You'll see evidence of the logging days. They call these the cribs. So what they would do is, you'd say you built 3 or 4 of these, and then you'd have cable going from one crib to another, and then behind it you'd corral all the logs so that they're not floating down the river until you're ready for all of them to go at once. And so, this has to go back, 80 years or more, and it's still in. How do you spell crib?
C-R-I-B?
I think so. Yeah. Baby crib. Beautiful guild hall. I find that even, during the height of the fall colors, not too many people go this far up into Vermont, the leaf peepers. So you've got some elbow room up north. Anybody recognize this spot? In Newberry, the Placey Farm. It's beautiful spot. You get the White Mountains and Green Mountains on one side, the cows coming down to the water. And some people have, they said, well, we have your book. I met them at one of these talks. And I said, oh, did you canoe a lot of the river? They said, no, we used it to bike over a series of weekends most of the river, biking end to end. I said, what a great idea. And again, up north here, you would have it, you know, you're right on the Vermont side, barely any traffic. I found the Vermont side prettier up this way. Did you know New Hampshire owns the river? I learned that there are some markers in the woods. And I think Vermont is fine with that because they let New Hampshire deal with the bridges, I think. I put this in to show you I cheated every now and then because you can't paddle with your feet up. But on these big impoundments where some of the dams were, it's like you're on a giant lake, and the wind, when it's coming from the southwest, would just catch the bow of your canoe and keep trying to turn you backwards. So when I hit like the big ones, like the Moore Reservoir, I brought a little electric trolling motor. So I did cheat now and then. In the round barns, and I had read the reason the Shakers made them round was, you know, you could put the feed in the middle and the cattle could access it from all sides. But then when I was doing this program in Newberry, a woman said, there's another reason. I said, what's that? And she said, so the devil would have no corner to hide in. I never heard of that one, but I believe you. So we're making our way down towards Orford, New Hampshire, and those beautiful homes set back on the rolling lawns. So this was the homestead, not this particular house, but where Samuel Morey lived, who, you know, there's a whole argument, who invented the steamboat? Was it Morey or Fulton? And one of the chapters in River Days, I talk about my research, and I came to the conclusion that Morey invented it. But Fulton got all the credit because he made it commercially viable, and it took off. And so legend has it that Morey, out of frustration, sank his boat in Lake Morey. My dad joked years ago, they took him water skiing there, and they never told him, hey, if you fall, you're supposed to let go of the rope. And he said, I went to the bottom of the lake and I saw Morey's steamboat. There's a nice hiking spot, the Palisades in Fairleigh. So you're looking down on the Connecticut River, and they have nesting peregrine falcons in this cliff. So I think they close it during the nesting season, which might be like a late spring, but then they reopen it to hiking after that. I don't think I've ever seen a peregrine falcon. Has anybody seen them? Yeah? Are they up in this area, or are they all along the river now? You have? Yeah, I haven't. Has anybody seen a mountain lion? Because there's a lot of talk about are there mountain lion or not in New England. You know, the guy, I'm off subject for a minute, but the biologist who reintroduced the bald eagles to New England, he did that at Quabbin Reservoir. He said, I was sitting up in a blind in a tree watching the eagles, and I saw a mountain lion trot by, so could be. And that, where my cabin is in Woodbury, I have a neighbor up there, born and raised in Vermont. He said, Mike, I saw a mountain lion right on the ice in front of your little shack. So maybe. We know there's been a couple that have transitioned through, because there was one found dead on a highway in Connecticut, and they traced the DNA all the way back to the Dakotas. So it's possible. I've never seen one or never seen the tracks, but I do trust what these people are telling me. So you notice from this shot from the Palisades, the river's discolored. And I got lucky because I was coming down the river and I figured, I'm going to camp at one of these islands. They do have some primitive camping spots. And then I said, wow, I'm making better time than I thought. I'll go down. And I end up camping behind that church. And that was a lucky break because then it poured all night. This is good 30 years ago. Poured all night. And when I went back to look at the island where I was going to camp, it was nothing but the tops of trees. So imagine trying to pack your stuff and get out of there in the middle of the night as the water's coming in. But the rainbow came out afterwards that next day. So you start to pick up more boat traffic down here as you reach, Dartmouth College area and the outing club. And this is the backside of the Wilder Dam. So they open that up in the spring where there's a big plate glass window. You can look at the fish ladder and see what's going on. So there's a big lamprey eel. They have the round suction cup mouths. So they come all the way from the ocean to spawn in fresh water. And it's not like any eel I've ever seen before. Its head is just like this big suction cup with tiny circular rows of teeth. So it'll latch onto a fish and suck the blood from it. Remember the slide I showed you of the unicorn moose? This is the lamprey coming out of a human head. Snake charmer. I would see a couple beaver now and then on the river and not see the lodges, but then I noticed a couple of them would go right into holes in the bank. So I learned, sometimes the beaver don't bother to make a lodge because we call them bank beaver. It's the same beaver, but they get their burrows right in the steep banks of the river. And a lot more beaver in New England now than ever, and various wildlife is benefiting from that because they create these swamps. And this is not a welcome bird. This is the mute swan, not a native bird to America. They're all over Massachusetts now, and they're very aggressive. If you approach one with your canoe or kayak, the thing will come at you with its wings out. And that is a native bird, the fishhawk or the osprey. You can always tell an osprey from an eagle by that marking on the side of its head, whereas a bald eagle would be completely white. So you see these both inland, hanging out near big bodies of water like the Connecticut River, and even a little more common next to the ocean. And they just plunge down in and will grab a fish. They could see it from above. And I was in Florida and I caught a little fish. I put it next to me. I was going to take it home and eat it. And an osprey came down, took the fish. Everybody on the beach was laughing. Not me. And sometimes I'd hear wildlife, but because you're down in the canoe and the banks are high, you couldn't see it. But every now and then you get lucky. And I noticed barred owls is one species of owl that usually will let you get close. And they're the ones who do the woo, 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 woo. Whereas the great horned owl, has a deeper, long note. Great horned owls usually won't let you get too close. Luna moth, well, look, it's missing its tail. It flew right through the campfire. Next morning it was gone, so I assumed it could still fly without the tail. So the great blue herons are a big beneficiary of the comeback of the beaver because they're creating these wetlands where they can catch fish, but also that's the preferred nesting spot is when the beaver make the beaver dam, the trees behind it get waterlogged and die, and it's in those dead trees that the heron like to make their nests. So they oftentimes look kind of prehistoric, these giant birds up there. So we've hit our area, now where we are here. This is like a little warning. They call these big boulders in the river the chicken and the hens. And it's to warn you that the Heartland Rapids are coming up, and you may want to portage around.
That's right by Max Maple, isn't it?
What's it?
That's right by Max Maple.
Max Maple? What's that? What's Max?
Establishment,
The dairy farm?
the Brook Road, that's right off the Brook Road.
Okay. Yeah. And why do they? And why do they call the Heartland Rapids Sumner Falls? What's Sumner?
That's a family name.
A family name. So they goes, because I've heard it be called both. So a family who lived there years ago. And then here they are in a period of drought, so you could see what's under them. And it's these ledges sticking up, so if you come through with a canoe or a kayak and you hit the ledge and the current then takes your, say, kayak sideways, and that's when you can capsize. Same thing with on the ocean, you don't want to be sideways to a big wave. You want to get your bow and go up and over it. But there is one way to go through that center channel there. You could see it on the left. Cornish Bridge. They say this is the largest covered bridge east of the Mississippi River.
One is single span.
Single span. Did they have a fire here few years back?
Different bridge.
A different bridge. Oh, okay. What bridge was it? 'Cause-
It was in the April area?
okay,
But this one was rebuilt in '88.
okay. Beautiful, just a beautiful bridge with Mount Escutney in the background. And sometimes people like to fish by the spans because fish don't want to waste energy in the current. They want to conserve energy, so they'll be behind an abutment or a big boulder, and then they'll dart out to get their meal. For years I'd come up here and never knew that St. Gaudens National Historic Site was there. It's so beautiful in the spring with the plantings and just to wander around. And the trail through the birches. And then nearby again, another place that I didn't know about growing up was the fort at number 4. This was like the northernmost outpost during the French and Indian Wars. So it took the brunt of attacks from the French and their native allies coming down the Connecticut River. This would have been the first settlement they hit. And this is where they took Susanna Johnson captive with some other settlers as well. And she had this amazing survival ordeal where when they take her, she's pregnant, and on day 2, she actually has the baby while marching on the trail. And the natives, instead of killing the baby, they want to bring as many humans as they can up to Montreal, sell them to the French, and then the French would ransom them back to the English, so everybody's making $1. So they let the baby live, and she said, thank God they let me and the baby ride the horse for a while. I was, just giving birth. It was awful, but it's better than walking. But they said then everybody got so hungry they ate the horse. And from there it was brutal. She said she had to walk, and her husband was carrying her on her back, and the neighbor was carrying the baby. And then when they got to Otter Creek, the baby fell out of the neighbor's arms and was going down Otter Creek, but he saved it, and the natives wanted him to save the baby, and he did. And then I wonder, why would she call getting to Lake Champlain the happiest day? Because that means they got her for good, and she's going to be shipped to Canada as a...
Ride in a boat.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. She no longer has to be carried on a back or walk. So, and she did make it. And maybe some of you've seen it. There is a marker that she erected on the Cavendish-Reading line. And it's supposedly at the spot where she gave birth to her daughter, who she named Captive. So now you know the little story. The falls. They say there's some Native American petroglyphs. I've never seen them, but you probably need like a binoculars to look down and see them. What do they look like, those of you who have seen them? Is it like heads, human heads?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're very interesting.
Do you need a pair of binoculars to get a good look at them, or can you
I think you can
hike down there?
Yeah, but you can easily, after this is done, Google them and find them, the images.
Yep.
Yeah, they're very, very interesting.
So we've roughly hit the halfway point on our journey, and I thought, oh boy, things are going to change dramatically as you get into, higher population center. But I was pleasantly surprised. Still a lot of beautiful areas to go through. Particularly, I thought for sure when I hit Connecticut, it'd be wall-to-wall homes. But no, most of the land is protected along it. You got to get by Hartford, but then it's like you're paddling through the woods again. And you see some erosion on the banks, and I thought, oh, it's from the power boats, but I think it's from the dams that are holding water back, then releasing it, holding it. So I have a love-hate relationship with the dams. I hate to see them because they do block some fish passage. Some get up the ladder, some don't. But on the other hand, that's what protects this area from flooding. You can collect all the water behind these dams, say, at the Moore Reservoir. So I think, what was the big Hurricane Rita a few years back that devastated Vermont? Irene. And the Connecticut River didn't have nearly the problems that, say, the White River had. And it's because of the impoundments.
And it's part of the Green Energy Network.
Mm-hmm. But the White River, I was just there yesterday, Bethel, there was a couple homes there swept right into the river. And this is where I saw more and more power boats. This one, for some reason, didn't like me in the canoe, so he came by. He's coming right at me. I wave the paddle, make sure he sees me. Turns at the last minute to send a big wave at me. Luckily, I'd been on the ocean, though, to get the bow. And people are like, oh, did you get the license plate? I said, I barely had time to raise my finger. I don't know why he did that. What did I do? I'm just in my canoe, but minding my own business. But that was the only bad experience of the whole trip. That was the only bad experience I had. Other people were like, oh, you're welcome to camp in our backyard or come over for dinner and then you can pitch your tent. I met a lot of great people because I wasn't trying to go fast. I'm taking pictures, I'm taking notes for the book, talking about portage areas and places to put in, take out. So we're down a little further into Massachusetts. This is the French King's Bridge on Route 2. So I'm looking north, so Vermont would be on the left, New Hampshire on the right. French King's Bridge, which has not, everybody thinks it has to do with King Philip's War, but French King means they named it during the French and Indian Wars. King Philip's War, I've written 2 books on that, is 1675 to 1676. Bloodiest conflict in America's history on a per capita basis. So higher casualty rate than even the Civil War. Fought between the Native Americans and the colonists. So I did a history book with Eric Schultz, and then I did a novel, Until I Have No Country, that follows the lives of 2 Native Americans through the war. They're fictional, but all the events that happened to them are true and in the right chronological order. So I always said, now that I'm getting older, I'd love to get back to those kind of books, those historical novels, where you have more creativity and you can make up the dialogue, but still stay true to the facts. They're just tougher to find good publishers because there's so many people who want to write fiction. That's one of the larger tributaries. White River's probably number 1. This might be number 2. This is the Millers River. And it's interesting, if you look straight down where it comes in, you could see the Millers River on the left, the tannin-colored waters from the vegetation makes it a tea color, and then the Connecticut River a little bluer on the right, and they're mingling. And then this is the deepest spot on the Connecticut River. It could be 100 feet deep, like a canyon down there.
Where exactly is that?
That's looking, I'm at the French King's Bridge, taking that photo looking down. So at what we call Turner's Falls, the natives called it the Great Falls. That was a place through the eons they would gather to catch the salmon coming up the Connecticut River, hitting the falls, easy place to catch them. And this was the pivotal battle during King Philip's War, because if you were a native, this was the place to, rest up, resupply. They're able to grow some corn here and then continue the fight. But eventually, Captain Turner led a raid there, and he really surprised the Indians. He's coming from Northampton and Hadley, Springfield, coming like this. But instead of just attacking the village that's here like that, he curls around and comes from a direction they least expect it, from the north. And he's got them trapped at the bend of the river. And so even the survivors, they try to, it's springtime, try to swim across. Current just takes them over the falls. But after he destroys the village, he's got to get back to safety, and the natives who survived caught up with him and killed him. So it's the pivotal battle, because this was their last safe place, resting, resupply place in Massachusetts. And once he drove them out of here, most of them are heading north, join up with the Abenakis in Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Canada.
What was the date of that?
This would have been, let's see, the war started June of 1675, and this was May of 1676. And the war lasted 14 months, so it's a major event, and they never even taught it to us in school. So that's why I wrote the historical novel, hoping not just adults would read it, but some high school kids to learn about what happened here. And then the colonists, of course, moved in and settled at Turner's Falls, and this is what it looked like with the two islands in the middle of the waterfall. Really beautiful. And look how ugly it is today. It's just hydroelectric dam. You can't, see the falls anymore. And I thought, well, it's going to be ugly from here out. But that wasn't the case. This shot is taken at the top of Mount Sugarloaf in South Deerfield. So if you go there, you can either drive to the summit or hike up to the summit and just get this sweeping view to the south. So this is real rich agricultural land down here, over the eons has been flooded, and deep, deep topsoil. Unfortunately, most of it still is farmland. They say that's the biggest sycamore east of the Mississippi. And it's funny, I took that picture, and the lady whose property it was on came out. And I said, "Oh, you're so lucky to have this tree." And she goes, "Not in the fall." But those sycamores, that color pattern is just so beautiful. You have the white and then the dark brown and these patches. Looks like my friend can walk on water, but you still have some rapids even in Massachusetts. So this is Montague, Sunderland area. Great place to canoe and kayak. You're through the woods again. Maybe that's why my son stopped fishing with me years ago. But it's hard to tell from this picture. Is it a walleye or is it a smallmouth? Hard to tell. But we would, I did part of that river trip with him, and we would just camp on the side of the river and leave no trace, and had a ball. That's not me, but you get the idea. Great rope swing, and the river is swimmable. They call it Class B, which means swimmable, fishable, but you don't want to be in there after a heavy rain, and I'll explain why in a moment. But other than that, about the heavy rain, it's clean enough now, which is light years from where it used to be. If you're as old as I am, you remember how polluted it was, and even, back in the 40s, 30s, the river would change color because of the dyes used at the different plants. It was just like one big open sewer, and it's come a long way. Satellite view of the oxbow that the river no longer goes through, so it must have made that curl through there, and then maybe during a big breach, who knows, maybe back to the glacier days, because they do say a lot of this was called Lake Hitchcock. it came through, and so this is Mount Tom, and that's Mount Holyoke. And it used to go like that, but now it just cuts that oxbow right off.
Is north up?
Yeah, in this map, north is up, yes.
And that's Northampton.
Yes, yep, Northampton. That's out of focus on purpose. That's the Connecticut River Loch Ness Monster. And there are some inns. I didn't camp out every night. Sometimes I stayed at inns. This one used to be an old stagecoach stop right next to the river, and then because of early flooding before the dams, they moved it further back from the river. And that's another way to see the whole Connecticut River. You could bike end to end, you could drive end to end, or canoe end to end. The tobacco farms, well, they were everywhere when I was a kid. You could get a job picking tobacco. It was really hard work. But now, you know, they still grow tobacco, but nothing like 50 years ago. And they have those open slats to just let the big leaves dry.
Do they grow a lot of cannabis?
I don't know. It's a good question. And I think most of the cannabis is grown inside now, you know, because they have total climate control and lighting. Dinosaur footprint. This is a little park right off Route 5 called Dinosaur Park by the trustees of reservation, and there's a few tracks right next to the river. Must have been mud, and now it's solidified. So that's about 17 inches long, Ubrontes. There's, if you really want to see a ton of dinosaur footprints, Rocky Hill, Connecticut has a whole museum. It's like this. So they've covered all the footprints, and you go inside and see the rock with all sorts of weird dinosaur footprints. So they didn't move them there. They just built the structure over the spot. So it gives you perspective on our lives. We're just passing through, you know. So you could drive up to Mount Holyoke. This is the Summit House. And if you look down, you could see looking over towards Amherst. So you could have a picnic outside there. This is one picture I didn't take. They did try and reintroduce the salmon to the Connecticut River, but it didn't work. And so there's all sorts of theories of, you know, the river's got warmer because there's less tree cover on it. I kind of think that the fish ladders work for the salmon to go up, but when the fingerlings come back down to get to the ocean, I think they get sucked into the turbines. But that's a guess. But nobody knows why the experiment didn't work, because they were supposed to come all the way through here and go up the White River and spawn up that way. And a few did, but nothing like the hope. It could also be there's a lot of striped bass down in the first part of the river catching and eating some of the salmon. So there were a series of floods, flood of 1927, flood of 36, and then the hurricane of 38 just devastated the region. This is down in Northampton. Try to save what you can with the sandbagging. This, I love this slide. Look at the power of the river. I mean, creating waves as it comes down, and normally, you know, a railroad trestle would be 30, 40 feet above the water. It's right there. So this is the flood of 36, and it happened in March of 36. So you had snow melt and rain, and it was just absolutely devastating. And then in Springfield, you could see West Springfield on the other side's been all flooded out. People are lined up on part of the bridge to get a look at the damage and the flooding on the river. This slide was taken from the Springfield side of the Memorial Bridge. And there's Springfield today and the bridge in the background. got those beautiful, I call them the salt and pepper shakers coming up. So this is what I was saying about you don't want to swim after the heavy rain because the same sewers that are taking sewage to the sewage treatment plant are now taking street and road runoff, and they can't handle it all. The sewage treatment plant can't handle all this incoming water, so it bypasses the sewage treatment plant, goes directly into the river. So where these discharges occur, there's these signs up to warn people after heavy weather. And this is going on in a ton of rivers where our infrastructure is so old, it can't keep up with both. So we're at the South End Bridge, so that's Agawam on the right. They used to run a tour boat there, it no longer runs. And then my hometown is on the left there. So this is we called it the Meadows. The proper name is the Fanny Stebbins Wildlife Sanctuary in Long Meadow, Mass. So it's beautiful floodplains along the river. And in that book, The Waters Between Us, it opens up with my brother and I, he was 9, I was 11, my father was a baker, and he'd go to work at 4 a.m. in the morning, and he drops us off down here to go fishing, but we hadn't anticipated it would still be dark. So we're sitting there by the side of the road in the dark, and my brother goes, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Let's eat our lunch." We can't move, we can't see. And then he picked us up after his shift at the bakery, and all we caught was one catfish. But we bumped into a friend, though, down there towards the end of the day, and we couldn't believe it. He pulled out this 18-inch rainbow trout from one of these little streams. I call this slide Big Guy, Little Fish. As an old high school friend heard I was doing the whole river, he said, "I'll come with you." I said, "Okay, well, I'll pick you up in the canoe." He goes, "No, we better rent a boat." And the infield rapids, it's basically, there was a dam here, breached, fallen over, no plans to. Some people in Springfield would like it to be remade because that would make the water deeper backing up towards Springfield because they hit a lot of shallow spots in power boats. But there's no plans to ever rebuild this. And there used to be, because it was rapids, they built a series of canals, and here's an elevated part of the canal. So a horse would pull the barge up around the rapids. And then I had read, I'd never seen evidence of it, but read that there were canals going all the way up to Northampton. So down in Rocky Hill, there's still an operating ferry that will take your car across the river. Kind of a cool job, just driving the boat back and forth. We're getting down to the river mouth, almost to the end. This is the big, it's a, normally I pictured, drawbridges. This one's a swing bridge. So it's pivoting on that big central support, and traffic can come up either side of it. I asked the bridge tender what happens when it gets stuck. He goes, "One time it got stuck for 12 hours. I got so mad I jumped and swam to shore." The Goodspeed Opera House, that was going to be torn down, and thank God the people in the surrounding towns raised money, rehabilitated it, and now I think it's used for like dinner theater.
What town is that?
So we're in the Haddam area, approaching Deep River, and then Essex will be coming up. Gillette Castle. So he played the role of Sherlock Holmes at the Goodspeed Opera House, made a bunch of money, and bought this ridge above the river, and he was a little bit eccentric. He built himself a castle. And then he also built a miniature train line so he could go down the ridge, and he'd be in the conductor's part, and he'd pick up his guests and bring them up to his castle. And his last name was Gillette. So now it's owned by the state, so you can walk around, visit the castle. This is the view from the deck of the castle. You're looking south, the sun's coming up. So see what I mean about the most of the river is still wooded. Here we are way down in Connecticut. So they were smart. And, because of floods too. I always like this slide. You can see the storm clouds coming in. The sun's behind me when I took the picture. And everything's in here. The Goodspeed Opera House, the tour boat, swing bridge. You wonder why I'm on the river during the winter. Well, this is when you get a chance to see the bald eagles, because they'll say come down from Vermont and they'll want to be near open water to catch fish. And here it's brackish, so it rarely freezes over. And there's one up in the tree. Another way to tell them from the osprey is the bald eagle has a white tail. And it's much bigger than osprey as well. Hot dogs, get your hot dogs. I thought, what a tough way to make a living, be trapped in that little shack. But then I came back on a weekend and there was a line of boats to get the hot dogs. And I'm like, maybe he's got a good little business and maybe he bought this house right here. And years ago, you couldn't give away land on the Connecticut River because it smelled so bad and was so polluted. And now it's highly sought after because you could keep your yacht right in front of your house, go down the river from Essex here and be in the ocean. So, it's perfect for a boater. You don't have to drive to your boat. You just walk down the steps. Quite a house, though, huh? And the Connecticut River Museum, we're in Essex, Connecticut now, almost at the mouth. They have a painting of the first submarine. This is called the American Turtle. And the way he propels it is he uses his hand. And the idea was, during the Revolution, be in this little peanut-shaped submarine and go under a British ship and drill a hole in the bottom. See the drill coming up the top? And it had an arm with a little detachable, explosive, but he never sank a single ship. But they say this is the first submarine because the Dr. Bushnell could stay underwater in it for 15 or 20 minutes. Look at that big striped bass. This is an environmental success story because when I started ocean fishing in the early 80s, we never caught striped bass. It'd be bluefish, a lot of bluefish along the shore. And then starting around the year 2000, they put in stringent controls, and the striped bass population has really bounced back. And they come all the way up the Connecticut River to Holyoke. A few even go over the dam. I wouldn't be surprised if some come as far as Vermont and New Hampshire. But that's a big guy. That was a good 43 inches. And now the rule is you can only keep them if they're between 28 inch and 31 inch. They got to be right in that slot. They want the big ones to continue breeding and the young ones to grow, so they just allow a small. So it's funny, you're fishing now, and if you catch a big one, you're like, oh, darn. Yeah, you got to let it go. So we've hit the river mouth, Old Saybrook and Old Lyme. This was plays a big role in the Pequot War. Nothing like King Philip's War. It only lasted 4 weeks, and the colonists pretty much wiped out the whole Pequot nation. That was 1636. But they own Foxwoods now, so they got the last laugh. And the Nature Conservancy calls this one of the great places in America, one of the top 10, because so much of the river mouth has been totally protected. Great place to be in the spring. So if you go on my website, there's some interviews with these survivors who I talked with over the years, and they explain how they got through the ordeal. You could do a personalized book. And look, everybody's reading Extreme Survival. My new granddaughter. She's going to wonder why the only books I ever give her are my own. But believe it or not, she's 13 months now, and my daughter's always sending me these pictures of her holding up these kids' books like she's trying to make sense out of it. So maybe she got the gene. Okay, she didn't read it cover to cover. And you know you've reached the ocean when you see the lighthouse. So I'm going to close with a quote from Thoreau. This was in one of his journals, and he said, "We are slow to realize water, the beauty and the magic of it." So in other words, we take it for granted, especially in New England, because we have so much compared to other parts of the country. But he's right, it does, has this beauty and a magic.
Does it empty into,
New London is a little bit to the north of it, but it empties right in there into the Sound. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I'll take questions or comments, and if I'm stumped, somebody can probably help me out. Yes?